Laura sat on the cold floor of an empty cargo bay. The metal under her was rough and smelled faintly of oil. Above her, a single weak light flickered. The air was stale and heavy, like the station had not been cleaned in years. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her thin arms around them. Her large dark eyes stared at the door. No one had come through it all day. No one ever did. The mining station was a lonely place. It floated on the edge of a dead star system, far away from the busy trade routes. No merchant ships stopped here unless they had to. The crew who worked here only cared about two things: getting paid and getting off the station as soon as their contract ended. Laura had no contract. She had no home. She had been here for months, moving from one empty room to another, finding scraps of food in trash bins, sleeping under broken machinery where the noise could hide her breathing. Her parents had been miners on the lower levels. There had been an accident. At least, that was what the station leader said. A section collapsed and no rescue teams went in. The leader told her they were gone and she had to move on. That was all. No one offered to take her in. No one even asked her what she would do. She was just another mouth to feed, and no one wanted that. Laura learned to survive by staying invisible. If she kept quiet and moved fast, the workers ignored her. If they saw her too often, some would shout at her to leave or throw things her way. She was small and quick, so she could slip away before they got close. At night, when the halls were empty, she would search for leftover food. She would drink from old water tanks and wash her face in the corner sinks. It was not much, but it kept her alive. The cargo bay where she sat now was her newest hiding place. It had once been full of shipping crates, but the last transport took everything away and never came back. Now it was just a hollow metal room with a high ceiling and a single door that opened into a hallway most people ignored. That was why she liked it. The fewer people walked past, the safer she felt. Still, the station never slept. She could always hear the hum of engines through the floor and the distant clank of metal as machines worked in the mining shafts. Sometimes there were sudden bangs when pipes burst or tools were dropped. The sounds would echo through the halls, and Laura would freeze, listening to see if anyone was coming her way. That day felt different. There was a new sound. It was faint, but it was not the hum of the engines or the clang of tools. It was like something scraping slowly along the metal walls. The sound moved, stopped, and moved again. Laura's ears twitched. She turned her head toward the dark corner of the bay, where an old vent cover sat loose. The noise seemed to come from there. She stood up slowly, her bare feet silent against the floor. She took a few steps closer, careful not to kick any debris. The vent was large enough for her to crawl through, though she had never tried. She peered into the black opening. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift inside, but the light was too weak to be sure. She stepped back, her heart beating faster. The scraping stopped. Laura's mind raced. Maybe it was just a rat, though she had never seen one this far up. Maybe it was a broken fan blade turning inside. But deep down, she felt it was something else. The air near the vent was colder, and the smell was strange, like burnt metal mixed with dust. Her stomach growled, pulling her attention away. She had not eaten since the night before. The food hall might have leftovers if she went now before the cleaning bots finished. She slipped out of the cargo bay, glancing over her shoulder one last time at the vent. The hallway outside was narrow and dim. The walls were covered in scratches from years of moving crates. She kept to the shadows, moving quickly past the main walkway where the workers gathered. A few voices echoed through the station, deep laughs, rough words, the clinking of mugs. No one noticed her. The food hall was almost empty. A tired cook leaned against the counter, scrolling through a handheld screen. He did not look up as she crept to the side table where scraps were sometimes left for the cleaning bots. Today there were only 2 stale bread rolls and a small cup of soup that had gone cold. She grabbed the bread and the cup, eating fast while keeping her eyes on the door. The soup was bitter but warm enough to ease the tightness in her chest. As she ate, she heard that strange scraping sound again. It was faint, but clear. This time it came from somewhere above the food hall. She froze mid-bite, her eyes scanning the ceiling. The cook did not seem to hear it. None of the sounds matched the usual rhythm of the station. It was slow, deliberate, almost like something was feeling its way along the walls. Her instinct told her to go back to the cargo bay and hide, but something in her wanted to know more. She finished the bread quickly, leaving the empty cup on the table. She slipped out of the food hall and followed the sound. It led her through side corridors, past locked storage rooms, and into a section of the station she had never entered before. The lights here flickered more often, and some panels on the walls were missing. Wires hung loose, swaying gently as the air system pushed weak currents through the halls. At the far end, she found another vent cover. This one bent open like something had forced its way out. The metal edges were sharp, and the marks on them were deep, like they had been scraped by claws or tools. Laura crouched down, peering into the vent. The darkness inside felt heavy. The cold air made her shiver. She stepped back, unsure what to do. She had survived by avoiding danger, not chasing it. But the sound was moving again, heading toward the living quarters. If something dangerous was inside the vents, it could reach anywhere. No one would believe her if she told them. They never listened before. Her hands trembled as she decided to go back to her hiding place. She would stay there and wait. Maybe it would pass. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, she knew something had changed in the station that day. Something was moving in the dark, and she was the only one who noticed. She walked quickly back toward the cargo bay, her bare feet making no sound. The door slid shut behind her, sealing her in the quiet space. She sat down again in the same spot on the floor, hugging her knees tight. The weak light above flickered once more, and the distant hum of the station felt less steady than before. Tom sat alone in his small quarters, a narrow metal room with one bunk, one table, and a cracked storage locker. The air smelled faintly of rust, and the walls hummed with the deep vibrations of the station's engines. On the table in front of him lay his old sidearm. Its barrel had a long crack running along the top, and the grip was worn smooth from years of use. Most people would have thrown it away long ago. Tom kept it because it was the last thing he had from his service days. He picked up the weapon, turning it slowly in his hands. It was useless for long-range shots. If he fired more than one round at a time, the barrel could split completely. The crew laughed at it whenever they saw it. Some called it scrap. Others called it decoration. But Tom had carried it for so long that it felt wrong to be without it. The station crew barely spoke to him unless they needed something heavy moved or a small repair done. Even then, they spoke with a tone that made it clear they thought they were doing him a favor by giving him work. He had been a frontier guard once, serving on the far edges of explored space. He had seen dangerous worlds and survived battles that should have ended him, but none of that mattered here. The people on this station did not care about medals or history. They cared about profit, and Tom had none to give them. That day, Tom sat cleaning the cracked weapon while the distant sounds of machinery echoed through the thin walls. He liked the quiet of his room. The rest of the station was noisy and tense, filled with shouts, clangs, and the constant hiss of air systems. Here, at least, he could think. But the quiet was broken by a strange sound. It was faint at first, a dragging scrape that seemed to move along the wall near his bed. Tom froze, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, a little farther, along. He had heard a lot of noises in his years on stations. Metal cooling after repairs, the hiss of steam from old pipes, the distant clank of tools. But this was different. It was slow, steady, almost deliberate. He set the weapon down and stood pressing his ear to the wall. The sound moved again, traveling toward the outer hallway. Tom pulled on his boots and stepped into the corridor. The lights above flickered as he followed the noise, his heavy steps quiet against the worn floor. The air felt cooler here, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. The scraping led him toward the older sections of the station, the ones most people avoided unless they had to work there. The walls here were stained, and some ceiling panels hung loose. Tom's eyes moved over each vent he passed, watching for movement. The sound was harder to hear now, drowned out by the distant hum of the engines. But he kept following. Near an old storage room, he stopped. The door was half open, and the air inside smelled faintly of burnt metal. Tom stepped in, his hand resting on the grip of his broken gun. The room was empty except for a few scattered tools and a stack of rusted crates. He moved slowly toward the far wall where a vent cover sat crooked. The edges were bent inward, like something had pushed from the inside. There were marks on the metal, deep, thin grooves that did not look like they came from human tools. Tom crouched down, staring into the vent's darkness. The cold air flowing out made his skin prickle. He reached up, tapping the earpiece he wore. It was linked to the station's security channel, but the crew rarely let him use it. The device gave a faint crackle, then silence. No one was listening. He stayed there a moment longer before a faint movement in the corner of his vision caught his attention. A small figure was standing in the doorway. It was Laura. Her eyes were wide, and she looked ready to run. Tom had seen her before, darting between halls, always keeping to the shadows. Most ignored her, but he had noticed how quietly she moved, how she always seemed alert to danger. "You should not be here," Tom said quietly. "I heard something," Laura replied, her voice soft but steady. Tom nodded toward the vent. "Me, too." They stood in silence for a moment, listening. The scraping sound had stopped again, but the cold air kept flowing. "What do you think it is?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Tom said, "but it is not normal." He studied her for a moment. She looked thin, tired, but her gaze was sharp. She had likely been following the sound longer than he had. He wondered how many times she had noticed things others ignored. "You stay here much?" Tom asked. Laura shook her head. "I move a lot. Safer that way." Tom understood. This station was not kind to those without a place. He looked back at the vent. If something dangerous was moving inside the walls, it could reach anywhere. "You got anyone who will care if something happens?" Tom asked. Laura hesitated, then shook her head again. "Figures," Tom said. "Me neither." He stood and stepped, back from the vent. "If you hear that sound again, find me. Do not follow it alone. Things like this usually mean trouble." Laura tilted her head. "Why would you care?" Tom gave a small shrug. "Because trouble is easier to deal with when you are not the only one facing it." Before she could answer, the station's alarms blared. A deep, rising tone echoed through the halls, followed by a flashing red light. Tom's earpiece crackled. Again, this time with urgent voices. "Security to docking bay. Possible breach. All non-essential crew stay in quarters." Tom looked at Laura. "That means something is here." The scraping sound returned, louder now, and it came from more than one direction. Tom tightened his grip on the broken gun. "Stay close," he told her. "And keep your eyes open." They stepped out into the hallway together. The cold air from the vents seemed to follow them. Somewhere deep inside the station, metal groaned as if something heavy was moving through the walls. The alarms kept sounding, but Tom was no longer thinking about orders from the crew. Whatever had entered the station, it was not here for trade or talk, and he had a feeling that before the day ended, the broken gun would see use again. The alarms kept wailing as Tom and Laura moved down the narrow hallway. The flashing red lights made the shadows stretch and jump along the walls. The cold air from the vents followed them, carrying that faint smell of burnt metal. Laura kept close behind Tom, her steps light and quick. Tom's boots hit the floor in slow, steady beats, his broken gun held low but ready. They passed a junction where two engineers were sealing a hatch. One of them saw Tom and shouted over the noise, "Security orders say stay in your quarters." Tom did not stop walking. "Something is in the vents. If you value your lives, keep your hatches locked." The engineers glanced at each other but did not follow. Most of the crew thought Tom liked to invent problems. It was easier for them to believe the alarm was just another system error than to think a real danger had come aboard. As they moved deeper into the older part of the station, the sounds changed. The scraping was no longer slow and steady. It was quicker now, almost urgent. Sometimes it was above them in the ceiling, sometimes beside them in the walls. It seemed to circle them, moving from vent to vent. Laura's eyes darted to each vent. They passed. "It is following us," she whispered. Tom had already noticed. He tightened his grip on the gun. "Keep walking. If it wants us to stop, it will have to try harder." They reached a wide service corridor that led toward the outer ring of the station. The lights here were weaker, and the floor was dusty with bits of metal shavings. A set of heavy double doors stood at the far end, marked with a faded sign that read "Maintenance Access. Authorized crew only." Tom pressed his hand to the door's control panel. The lock light blinked red. "They sealed it," Laura said. "Not well enough," Tom replied. He pulled a small tool from his belt and opened the side panel of the lock. His hands moved quickly, reconnecting wires and bypassing the seal. The door slid open with a groan. Beyond the door, the air was colder and smelled stronger, like something had burned inside recently. They stepped into a narrow maintenance tunnel lined with pipes and cables. The sound of the scraping grew louder, here, echoing along the metal walls. It came from ahead, then behind, then from the side all at once. Laura's voice was tense. "There is more than one," Tom nodded. "That would be my guess." They reached a cross-section where 4 tunnels met. Tom raised his hand, signaling Laura to stop. The scraping stopped too. The silence was heavy, pressing in on them from all sides. Then, from the tunnel to their left, a shape moved into view. It was tall and thin, its body covered in dark armor that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal. Its head was narrow, with a smooth surface where eyes should have been. Tubes ran from its back to a small pack that hissed with every slow breath. Its hands were long and ended in hooked claws. The creature moved with a strange, gliding step, its claws barely touching the ground. Laura's breath caught. She had never seen anything like it. Tom's voice was low. "Boarding hunters. I have seen them before." The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying them. Then it took a slow step forward. Tom lifted his gun, aiming at the pack on its back. He squeezed the trigger. The gun fired once, the crack of the shot echoing through the tunnel. A spark jumped from the pack, but the creature kept moving. Tom pulled the trigger again. This time the weapon jammed with a harsh click. The crack in the barrel smoked faintly. The creature let out a low, vibrating sound. From the other tunnels, 2 more shapes appeared, each in the same dark armor. They moved in, blocking the way back. Laura's heart pounded. "We are trapped." Tom scanned the walls quickly. "Not yet." He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the 4th tunnel. The creatures reacted instantly, moving faster now, claws scraping sparks from the floor. They ran. The tunnel curved sharply, leading into a chamber filled with old machinery. Pipes hissed steam into the air, and broken lights swung from the ceiling. Tom led Laura behind a large metal cylinder. He pointed to a hatch near the floor. "Inside. Now." Laura crawled in without hesitation. Tom followed, pulling the hatch shut just as the first creature entered the chamber. Through a narrow gap, they could see its shadow moving across the walls. The hunters searched the room with slow, deliberate steps. One moved close to the hatch, its claws clicking lightly on the metal. Tom held his breath. Laura pressed herself against the cold wall, her eyes fixed on the narrow gap. A loud hiss came from one of the pipes, releasing a cloud of steam into the room. The creature turned toward the sound, giving Tom a moment to move. He pushed the hatch open and pulled Lura out the other side, into another narrow passage. They kept moving, the sound of claws echoing behind them. The passage sloped downward, leading toward the deeper maintenance levels. Tom knew these parts of the station well. Few people came here because the air systems were weak and the lighting unreliable. After several turns, they reached an old supply room. Tom closed the door behind them and locked it. The room was dark except for a single small light near the ceiling. Shelves of rusted tools lined the walls. Lura leaned against a crate, catching her breath. "What are they?" "Killers," Tom said. "They clear stations before the main force arrives. They do not leave survivors." Her voice was quiet. "Then no one else knows?" "Even if they did, most would hide and hope the problem passes. But that is not how you survive." Lura looked at the cracked gun in his hand. "That thing will not stop them." "No," Tom admitted. "But I can still use it. And I know their weak points." He moved to the shelf, grabbing a length of metal pipe. He tested its weight in his hand. "We will need to move fast and stay ahead of them. If they corner us again, we will not get another chance." The scraping sound began again, faint but steady, moving toward the supply room. Tom looked at the door. "They are tracking us." Lura's eyes narrowed. "Then we stop running." Tom gave a thin smile. "That is the spirit." The scraping sound outside the supply room door grew sharper, like claws raking the floor. Tom moved quietly to the far side of the room, scanning for another way out. He found a hatch halfway up the wall, marked with faded yellow paint. It led to one of the abandoned maintenance tunnels. He pointed at it. "We go through there. It will take us around the hunters, but it is not safe." Lura's voice was calm but firm. "Nowhere is safe right now." Tom climbed up onto a crate and forced the hatch open. The hinges groaned, but the noise was drowned out by the steady scratching outside. He boosted Lura through first, then climbed in after her. The tunnel beyond was narrow, just wide enough for them to crawl side by side. The air was dry and thick, with dust. Their movements stirred faint clouds that hung in the weak light from Tom's small wrist lamp. They crawled for several meters before stopping at a grated opening. Tom looked down through it and saw the main corridor below. Several workers ran past, heading toward the docking bays. None of them looked up. None of them had any idea what was moving through the vents above their heads. "We cannot go that way," Tom whispered. "Too many people. If the hunters reach them, it will be a slaughter." Lura's eyes met his. "Then we lead the hunters away." Tom nodded. "We head for the lower power conduits. They are loud and full of heat. It will mask our movements." They continued forward, taking a sharp turn into a sloped tunnel. The sound of the hunters faded for a while, replaced by the constant hum of heavy machinery. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became. Drops of condensation clung to the metal walls, sliding down in slow trails. Halfway down the slope, Lura stopped. She pointed at a small vent on the side wall. The grate was bent outward, and there were fresh scratches around the edges. Tom examined them. One came through here not long ago. He checked his gun, knowing it would likely fail again if fired. Still, the weight of it in his hand felt right. "We keep moving. Do not stop unless I tell you." The tunnel ended. In a large chamber filled with thick pipes and humming generators, dim orange lights glowed through the steam that leaked from broken joints. The noise was constant, a deep, steady thrum that seemed to vibrate in their bones. "This is it," Tom said. "They will have trouble tracking us here, but it will not last forever. We need a way to get to the docking bay without crossing." The main halls. Lura studied the room. "What about the old cargo lift? The one that goes straight to the bay from the lower level?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "You know about that?" "I hid there once," she said. No one uses it because it is stuck halfway up, but there is a manual release. Tom smiled faintly. Then that is our route. They crossed the chamber, weaving between pipes that hissed bursts of hot steam. Lura moved with ease, slipping through narrow gaps. Tom followed carefully, his boots clanging softly on the grated floor. A sudden noise cut through the hum of the generators, a metallic thud from the far side of the room. Tom stopped, signaling Lura to freeze. Another thud came, then the sharp scrape of claws. The hunters had found them. They broke into a run, heading for the opposite exit. Steam clouds swirled around them, hiding their movements. Behind them, the hunters moved quickly, their armor reflecting flashes of orange light. The hiss of their breathing packs mixed with the pounding of metal feet. Lura reached the exit first, slipping into the narrow passage beyond. Tom followed, firing a single shot back into the steam. The gun kicked hard, and a thin crack along the barrel widened. The shot hit one of the hunters in the shoulder, making it stumble, but it recovered almost instantly. The passage twisted sharply, leading to a set of stairs that spiraled upward. They climbed fast, the sound of claws echoing below. At the top, they reached a heavy door with a broken lock. Tom shoved it open, revealing a dark storage corridor lined with old crates. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung in the corners. They moved quickly, turning down another hall until they reached the lift shaft. The old cargo lift hung halfway between floors, its cables groaning under its weight. A small control panel sat beside the shaft, its screen cracked and dark. Tom stepped forward, inspecting the panel. Manual release is here, but once we drop it, there is no going back. That is fine, Lura said. We are not going back. Tom pulled the release lever. The lift jerked, then began to descend slowly. The sound of grinding metal echoed through the shaft. Far below, the docking bay lights glimmered faintly. They stepped onto the lift as it moved. Tom kept his gun ready, eyes on the open shaft above. Lura stood close, scanning the walls for movement. Halfway down, the sound came again, claws scraping metal, this time from inside the shaft. Tom looked up and saw a hunter climbing down the wall with swift, sure movements. Its claws dug into the metal, leaving deep marks. Down, Tom ordered. They crouched as the hunter dropped onto the edge of the lift. Tom swung the broken gun, like a club, hitting the creature in the head. The impact knocked it sideways, but it caught the edge with one claw. Lura grabbed a loose cable and swung it around the hunter's arm. She pulled hard, wrapping the cable tighter. Tom kicked the creature's chest, sending it falling into the darkness below. They heard the distant crash of metal. The lift reached the bottom with a final groan. Tom and Lura stepped off into a dimly lit corner of the docking bay. Ships stood silent, their hulls glinting faintly in the low light. Most of the bay was empty, the crew having locked themselves in safer areas. Tom looked around. We need a ship ready to fly. Once the hunters see we are here, they will come fast. Lura pointed toward a small freighter tucked near the far wall. That one. I have seen it leave before. The pilot keeps it fueled. They moved toward it, keeping low. In the shadows above, movement stirred. The hunters were already in the bay. The alien ship above the wasteland was a shadow against the bright rings of the planet. It was not the largest warship Mira had seen, but it had the cold precision of something built only for control. Every movement of its engines looked calm, almost lazy, yet there was power behind it. The crew inside had no reason to hurry. They thought no one could fight them. Darren sat on a rock, his broken gun across his knees. He stared at it like a man looking at a tool that had betrayed him. The trigger still worked. The barrel was still straight, but the inner coil was fried. He had told Mira 3 times that it could not fire. She still kept glancing at it like it was the key to saving them. We cannot face them, Mira said. Her voice was steady but low. They will crush us before we get near. Darren smiled without humor. Then we won't face them. We will make them come to us. Mira frowned. And how do we make an enemy ship come down when it can just watch us from orbit? Darren looked out over the wasteland. The dry ground was cracked in long lines, and far in the distance, a pale shimmer marked the edge of a heat vent field. That ship is big, he said. Heavy. Heavy ships need fuel. And their kind? They take fuel from the ground. Mira understood. She had seen those fuel drills before. They came down fast, bored into the crust, and pulled up liquid energy from deep below. If they saw a large enough deposit, they would land without hesitation. We make a false signal, Darren said, big enough to look like a massive fuel. Pocket! They will come down, and when they do, they will be close enough for other plans. Mira shook her head. We do not have the tech for a signal like that. Darren pointed at the wreck of a mining crawler half buried nearby. That crawler has a seismic beacon. Still working if I can fix the coil, just needs power. Mira looked at the alien power cell in her pack, the one she had stolen in the night 2 days ago. She had not told Darren about it yet. Her instincts told her to hide things until she was sure. But now, maybe this was the reason she had taken it. She handed it to him. This will work? Darren's eyebrows went up. You've been carrying this the whole time? He did not wait for her answer. He was already moving toward the crawler. The two of them worked in silence, the sun dipping low and the sky turning a deeper shade of gold. Darren's hands moved with the calm speed of someone used to fixing things under pressure. Mira stood, watch, scanning the horizon for patrol drones. When the beacon roared to life, the ground vibrated like a living thing. A low hum rolled across the wasteland, and even Mira could feel the pulse through her boots. Darren's face was lit by the small screen showing energy readings. They will detect this in minutes, Darren said. Now we set the trap. But the trap was not a weapon. It was a chain of collapsible structures hidden under dust, linked to a trigger point. If the ship landed where Darren predicted, its weight would crush the structures, opening a deep sinkhole into the heat vent field. Ships could take heat, but direct vent gas was toxic to most alien alloys. It would corrode fast, eating through the hull in minutes. It was a plan born from desperation. Mira knew it should not work. There were too many points where it could fail. But she also knew Darren had that strange human way of making the impossible look simple. By the time night fell, they were ready. They sat in the shadow of a rock spire, watching the sky. Mira's people would have prayed. Darren just drank from his water pack and watched the stars like they were old friends. Then, a silver shape broke from the blackness above. The alien ship descended, slow at first, then faster as it locked onto the beacon. Mira's heart pounded. They're coming, Darren said. His voice was calm, but his grip on the broken gun tightened. The ship's landing lights cut across the wasteland. The shadow of its bulk swallowed the cracked ground. Mira could see the landing struts lower. They were right above the trap. Then, a deep metallic clang echoed as the first strut hit the weak crust. Dust and rock fell away. A hiss of white gas shot up from below. The ship's lights flickered. An alarm wailed from inside. Mira looked at Darren. It's working. He nodded. Not for long. We need to move before they... The ground shook with a sudden force. One of the struts snapped. The ship tilted, sliding into the sinkhole. Gas poured up in thick clouds, clinging to the hull like living mist. From above, small fighter drones shot out, circling like hornets. They're angry, Darren said. He lifted the broken gun, as if it might still help. Mira had no idea what he was planning, but she followed him anyway, because she had learned one thing. When Darren decided to act, strange things happened. The alarms echoed through the station halls as Tom and Laura raced toward the control hub. The red lights blinked furiously, casting sharp shadows on the walls. The cold air from the vents whipped past their faces, carrying the faint smell of burnt metal and dust. Tom's broken gun was heavy in his hand. He had no idea if it would fire again, but he held it tightly as if it were a lifeline. They reached the entrance to the control room, but the heavy door was locked down tight. Tom pressed his palm against the scanner. The panel flickered, then glowed green. The door slid open with a slow hiss. Inside, dozens of screens showed live feeds of the station. Some monitors flickered or went dark, damaged in earlier skirmishes. The room smelled of old electronics and cold metal. Laura hurried to the main console. Her fingers flew across the keys as she searched for the station's defense systems. "Here," she said, "there are old turrets mounted along the outer walls. They should still work." Tom nodded. "We need those turrets firing now. If those hunters get outside, they can call reinforcements." Laura tapped a command. The screens blinked as the turrets powered up. "They're online," she said. "But I can't control their aim. They'll fire automatically on any movement." Tom's eyes narrowed. Better than nothing. Outside, the distant roar of engines grew louder. Through the windows, dark. Shapes moved against the dull station lights. The boarding hunters were massing, their armor glinting in the harsh glow. They crept forward slowly, confident and silent. Suddenly, one turret fired. A sharp blast of energy lit up the night, striking a hunter in the chest. The creature stumbled, its armor sparking. Then another turret joined in, cutting a path of bright fire through the advancing enemies. The hunters hissed and recoiled, but pressed on. Tom looked at Laura. "We need to join the fight. If they breach the control room, this place is lost." Laura nodded. "Follow me." They moved through a side door and down a narrow staircase leading to the station's lower decks. The halls were narrower here, lit only by emergency lights that flickered on and off. The sound of combat echoed ahead. Metal striking metal, angry growls, and sharp commands shouted in strange languages. In a small armory, Tom found a few old weapons and ammo boxes. Most were empty or damaged, but he grabbed a heavy metal rod and a small pack of energy cells. The broken gun felt lighter in his hand now. Laura led him to the docking bay where several crew members were trapped behind sealed doors. They looked frightened but ready to fight. Tom raised his metal rod and nodded. "We take the fight to them." The bay doors slid open with a heavy groan. The hunters were already inside, their dark armor blending with the shadows. They moved, like predators, silent and deadly. Tom charged forward, swinging the metal rod with all his strength. He struck one hunter across the helmet, sending it crashing into a pile of crates. Laura darted between enemies, using her small size to strike, at weak points in their armor. She found a panel on one hunter's back and jammed a small tool inside. Sparks flew, and the creature howled in pain. The other hunters reacted quickly, surrounding them. Tom fired the broken gun, the weapon kicking hard, but still sending a shot through the nearest hunter's chest. The creature fell with a heavy thud. More hunters arrived, but the station's turrets opened fire again. Bright beams cut through the bay, forcing the attackers to take cover. The crew rallied, grabbing whatever weapons they could find and joining the fight. Tom felt a fierce energy rising in him. The broken gun in his hand was more than a weapon. It was a symbol. For too long, he had been ignored and left behind. Now, with Laura by his side, he was part of something bigger. They pushed the hunters back, forcing them toward the exit. Outside, the turrets kept firing, and the station's alarms blared victory calls. Finally, the last hunter fell. Silence returned, broken only by the heavy breathing of those who survived. Tom lowered his rod, looking at Laura. "We did it," she said quietly. "For now," Tom replied, "but this station is still ours to protect." The station was quiet now. The flashing red lights had been replaced by steady white ones. The smell of burnt metal and smoke was fading. Tom stood by the window in the control room, looking out at the stars. The battle was over, but the cost was clear in the damage around them. Broken panels, flickering screens, and shattered crates filled the halls. Laura came up beside him, her eyes tired but bright. "We held them off," Tom nodded. "Yes, but no one will forget the danger we faced." She looked out the window, too. "You could have left. You did not have to fight." Tom smiled softly. "I could have, but I did not, because someone had to care." For months, no one had cared about Laura. She had been invisible to the crew. Now, she was part of the team that saved the station, and Tom, once ignored and laughed at for his broken gun, was a hero. The station leader entered the room, flanked by 2 crew members. His face was stern but respectful. "You two did what none of us could. The station owes you its thanks." Laura looked at Tom. "We did it together." The leader nodded. "Together, yes. And from now on, this station will watch out for everyone. No one will be invisible here." Tom looked at Laura. "You ready for a fresh start?" She smiled. "I think I am." Outside, the stars shone bright, a promise of new adventures. The station was still old and broken in many ways, but it had a new hope, a hope born from 2 unlikely allies who refused to give up. Tom picked up the broken gun one last time. It had saved them in its own way. It was a reminder that even things that seem useless can be powerful when held by the right hands. Laura reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you for caring." Tom smiled. No one should ever feel invisible. Together, they faced the future, stronger, united, and ready for whatever the stars might bring next.